I'm talking today with Paul Thompson about the singer-songwriter Jake Thackray. Paul Thompson is a performer, songwriter, and author. In fact, he is the biographer of Jake Thackray with this book here, Beware the Bull, and The Enigmatic Genius of Jake Thackray. So, Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Paul, tell us, for those people who've probably never heard of Jake Thackray, because he was big in the 70s, that kind of time, who was he and what made him so special?
Okay, so Jake, he was a Yorkshireman. He was born in Leeds in 1938. He was the youngest of three sons, born to a policeman father and a very devout Catholic mother, Molly. He was educated as a Roman Catholic, went to Roman Catholic schools, Roman Catholic church, and so on. He became famous in the late 60s, appearing in guest spots on radio and then television. And for a few years in the late 60s, early 70s, could have been called, he was a household name. And he was performing songs which were peculiar, which were poetic, which were comic, which were bawdy, which were full of songs, which had a little bit of, I suppose, anarchic grit in them and an attitude on life. And they are quite unlike any other songs I can think of within the sort of English tradition of music. So he was a very original songwriter. He influenced
He's a
people.
very, very original singer as well. He had a very dour, lugubrious voice, and he always he looked very striking, I think, as a person. And I always seemed to wear these roll-top jumpers as well and just play a classical guitar.
Well,
But his
that's
voice was very, very commanding, I thought.
it was. I mean, he had extraordinarily fantastic diction, but he had this baritone voice, as you say. One Times reviewer once described it as sounding as though he'd swallowed an egg, singing as though he'd swallowed an egg, because there was a slight plumminess in some ways, but it was also distinctly northern.
He's been
And
likened to Noel Coward in some strange way, but I didn't think the two were very similar.
no, I think his singing style's different. I think I mean, that was
The
a
diction, I
comparison.
think, was what it was, wasn't it?
Exactly right, and it was a comparison which irritated Jake when he was called the North Country Noel Coward. But yes, it was a very unusual delivery, and the lugubrious delivery was something that he learned over time. Initially, when you see the early BBC performances, you can see that some director has said to him, "Well, yeah, you should smile," and then he worked out that actually the joke is funnier if you don't smile. Rather like Paul Merton, for example, that
Yeah.
delivering it deadpan, you could get more out of it, and that I suppose tied in with a skill he developed as a performer, that his body language was unusual in that you would be, his eyes would be saying an awful lot that his face wasn't saying. There would be a little look. I saw him a few times live, and it particularly came across then. But you could see that he was communicating something beyond the words about his attitude to the words and what the song was saying. But yes, and then a distinctive voice, and some people absolutely love it. I think it's a beautiful voice, and others would be dismissive of it because of this, what was seen as a slightly mannered style to it, but an unusual style.
Now we're agreed that we're in love. We'll have to face the la-di-da. The eyewash, all of the fancy pantomime. I love you very much. I'll try, love, I'll bill and coo. With your gruesome Auntie Susie, I'll stay calm. I'll play it cool. I'll let your tetchy uncles get me back across my heart. And I shan't get shirty when they say I look peculiar. I'll be nice to your mother. I'll come all over la-di-da. Although she always gets up me nose, I love you very much.
What made him special to you? I mean, he actually went to the extent of being his biographer. And
Yeah,
it's a fascinating biography, by the way. It's something which I am only halfway through. And I have to say it's hard to put down at times because it really is a very engaging and well-written biography. You did it with John Watterson, so the two of you are responsible for this. What made you so taken up that you wanted to actually write his biography?
Well, I became hooked as a teenager on Jake's songs because of all those qualities we already talked about: the humour, the storytelling, the poetry, the poignancy, and the peculiar mix of them all. And as time went on, I became aware. I started to perform his songs as an adult, and I suppose over the last 20 years, when there's been something of a revival, which a number of us as fans have worked on, I'd sort of forgotten Jake for a period of time, and then rediscovered him. And the opportunity came along to work with John on the book, and I had the time to do it. It was, I suppose, because he was one of my musical and songwriting heroes, to have the chance to research the life and then tell the story of the life of somebody who you really admire as a writer was a heaven-sent opportunity. And the thing about it was that the further we went into it, the more remarkable the life turned out to be. So I suppose I suppose some remarkable people might have rather dull lives, but in Jake's case, he's both a remarkable writer, and I suppose my thought was, well, where do these remarkable and strange songs come from? And in many ways, the life that he lived was one which was an equally strange life, I would say.
What was the most surprising or even difficult thing that you encountered in writing this biography then?
I think there were frustrations. There are certain areas where one would like to have known more. For example, the time he spent in France, which were pivotal to his development and his choice of ultimately to be a songwriter. That it was hot, and time spent in Algeria as well, at a very interesting time in the history of Algeria. That it would be nice to have found more there. So there were these little frustrations along those lines. I think another aspect was deciding when it was appropriate to deal with the fact that alcohol was an issue in Jake's life, and I certainly I felt that it needed to be dealt with. It was appropriate to deal with because it was an important feature in Jake's story. But at the same time, I didn't want that to be the story. So it was a matter of deciding, with a degree of creative sensitivity, well, at what point is it relevant to talk about this?
As a biographer, did you find it easy to uncover the truth about Jake? Because paradoxically, he was a rather strange character who used to hide the truth. I mean, you said his father was a policeman, but I've also read his father was a clerk and his father was someone else, a fireman, or he seemed to tell wild stories about himself and have a casual disregard for what was really true and what was really false.
But he did when it came to himself, I think, in terms of what he said about himself. Interestingly, the early interviews that he did for the press in the late 60s, he is less guarded, and you can see there things which you can corroborate, and what he says about what he wants to do and where he's living and so on. He's more open about it. But as time goes on, he certainly becomes more protective of his own privacy, and he certainly loves fantasy. And when I saw him live on stage, there would be this fascinating, peculiar charisma on stage as a performer, because he was clearly somebody who wasn't comfortable being on stage, and yet he had a gift and a talent for entertaining people. But he would blend a mix of fantasy that you would buy into because you'd want to believe it, but grounded in some very deep felt values about and an outlook upon the world. So you would get it. There was a mixture of honesty that you was getting a sense of, this is a man who really feels strongly about a whole range of different subjects, and you can feel that through what he's saying. But then he will produce this mist of fantasy around it, because he knows that will entertain and that it will protect his privacy as well.
I was going to ask you that. I mean, is this weaving of fact and fiction a matter of the fact that he was protecting himself and his privacy, or was it simply that he was just bored with the truth?
I think both could be at play. I think that I think I had a conversation with one of his friends who was saying, well, you know, sometimes you weren't quite sure which version of Jake you were going to get. I mean, not quite like Peter Sellers, for example, who so famously was a shapeshifter, but that Jake, there was a part of him that would want to entertain and feel under a degree of pressure to be Jake Thackray, not his real name, of course. He was born as John Philip Thackray, but it was a name that he decided to adopt and use. But I think probably, and he would say it to in interview. Oh, he would talk about, has written about interviews. I think this is in the preface to my second book about Jake, the Unsung Writer. I've got a passage from an introduction to a sheet music book he wrote, and he says, "Well, this is supposed to be the page where I write where you can read a bit of my biography, but I'm not interested in my biography. I've already read it." So he will engage in fantasy beyond that.
My brother Desmond at 13, he was a Boy Scout, keen and clean. He got presented to the Queen, and then he went and spoiled it all when he offered her a woodbine. All their sins, bless my kids, bless my kins, there they purge for all to see, up my family tree. Let this be understood, that our family name is Mud. Our sheep are black, our checks are dud, but we survive, we're alive, so it's up with the Thackrays. Notwithstanding all their sins, bless my kits and bless my kins, there they purge for all to see, my family tree.
I think the truth probably did bore him, but he certainly, I think, wasn't comfortable.
Sorry, I was trying to dig out the book. That's the other one
That's right. So that's a collection of Jake's writings, which and mostly it's almost entirely his prose writing, which is one of the unsung delights in terms of the material that he published. But I think more than anything else, he doesn't want the focus to be on him, and he would say this in This is something that came up regularly in conversations with people. If he was talking to somebody, and it might be a fan, he would very quickly turn the conversation to be about them rather than about him. There's a guitarist, John Etheridge, wonderful jazz guitarist that Jake played with a few times, and he ended up going to doing concerts with him, and they went with somebody who was the promoter after one of the concerts, sat down, and when the promoter was trying to talk to Jake about Jake's songwriting, Jake just said, "Look, I don't want to talk about Jake Thackray this evening." And the conversation went elsewhere. So I think that is an ongoing theme. I think he doesn't want to look inside, or certainly doesn't want other people becoming inquisitive about him.
And he hid behind this kind of facade. I mean, he wrote some stories, songs about himself. I mean, My Family Tree is one of them. But I think the facts within My Family Tree are almost entirely and wholly made up.
They will be. And I think there are very few songs where you could say, and I would say there are very, very few songs where you say that is Jake referring to himself. Or I think he uses what happens in his life and he channels it in all sorts of ways in his songs. I mean, the song The Brigadier which is a wonderful assault on the figure in the village who's just a bit more important, a bit wealthier than everyone else, and abuses their position of power over other people. Well, that was inspired by one of his neighbours. And the same thing is true, the ballad of Billy Kershaw, this country ploughman who has this magic way with all women, no matter what their afflictions may be. Again, Jake's brother-in-law said, well, that's inspired by somebody he knew at the pub. I think there's a song called To Do With You, which is the most glorious and beautiful love song about the difficulties of married love. And I've got no doubt that is autobiographical.
There may be better looking, better cooking women, better slung and better at bones than you. if I were a man for simple things, like flawless skin and bigger dinners, my dearest, I might have no more to do with you. But you know well enough that I am much more choosy. I want day to day to find myself with you, with the cheek to cheek and the tooth and claw, the milk and honey, the bread and water, dearest, I want everything to do with you.
That's one that stands out as something which is not only a personal song, I understood it to be, but also one with a very beautiful and haunting and unusual approach to it. That I think was probably written for his wife.
Well, I think so. I think that's very clear. But whereas, say, La Di Da, which of course is a song which is about the commitment that someone shows in getting married, that they love someone so much that they're prepared to take on all that goes with it, their family, no matter what they may be like. Well, that isn't autobiographical. But Jake sang the song to his future in-laws on the day that he met them. And it had rather, well, it wasn't perhaps the wisest of openings. So he'd already written it. I
think that's the last song you want to sing to your future in-laws, because it sort of slags off the in-laws rather brutally.
It does, and it wasn't about them, but it went down like a lead balloon, and
Not
I think
surprised.
When I saw Jake's university file a couple of years ago, and this is something that's in the at the back of the book, we put some an update, if you like. His personal tutor said, "I admire his courage, but do wonder about his prudence." And I think that decision to sing the song to them the day he met them was speaks volumes for the accuracy of that judgment.
Do we know anything about how he wrote his songs, or the process that he went through? I mean, the lyrics certainly are some of the most complex and cleverly worded, and they're complicated in the sense that he fits in many words into a tune in different kinds of ways. But do we know whether he wrote the words first and then fitted the tune to them afterwards, came up with a tune, or he wrote a tune and then he fitted words to it? Do
we don't know. I suspect, as a songwriter myself, given I'm influenced by him in my writing, and that given the sorts of songs that he writes, I think that it is likely that it was lyrics first, because you've got to have an idea, and his songs are all about ideas and stories and so on. So I think that's the real driver.
I remember reading somewhere that it was considered quite hard work to get the lyrics down. He would put himself in a room and just lock himself away and just work hard at getting the rhymes and fitting all the words in.
That's right. I mean, but though, I think that's true, and that's certainly true of the greatest songs, and songs like "The Hair of the Widow of Bridlington," which is just a fantastic, beautiful, poetic comic song that has something to say.
She had a massive motorbike, she had the widow of Bridlington, and so she could, when so she wished, ride back home early morning-ish with her hair in the air and smelling of fish. She did, and every time of a different fish, she did the widow of Bridlington. And though she did no harm, the neighbours sniffed as neighbours do, and day by day a cankerous rancor grew. Many a pair of front room curtains twitched and shook with rage, for she was wild as blackbirds are, and they were in a cage.
He talked about that and said, well, I had the idea because I'd met a woman who was in her 40s, she was a widow, she was a Guinness rep, and she got a motorbike, and that was where the idea of somebody living...
Oh, so there was a real person then?
Well, that's what he says.
Behind it.
That's what he says, and he's consistent, and he says it a couple of times. But as with Jake, always you have to seek, can you find triangulation? But I think that so with songs like that, he says, and then it was a good deal of hard graft. He was friends. One of his friends, fellow songwriter, said that he was conscious on one or two occasions of how fast Jake could write. That Jake went to bed one evening. They were staying at the playwright Alan Plater's house, and they went to bed, and Jake said, "I've got something I've got to write." And the next day he comes down and he's got the song. But I think
he was
Jake,
forced into that kind of position, then, wasn't he, by the format of Braden's Week?
that's
He had
right.
to come
So
up with a brand new song every single week.
exactly, and many of the songs. I mean, if you look at, I've got a full list of every song he performed on the show, and it's a mix. Some of them are topical songs, which clearly are inspired by news events. Some of them are songs he's simply not performed on television before. So some of the greatest songs. But yes, he resented the pressure. He dreaded the pressure because it would be the case. And his wife Sheila describes the fact that, Sunday he'd be coming down, having had the high of and the tension of performing live on television the night before on Braden's Week, and then Sunday you relax. By Monday you've got to look at the papers, try to find an idea, then you've got to develop the idea, you've got to phone the words through by Thursday because it's going to be, it's got to be run past the censor, and they've also got to do a set design that matches the song. And then you've got to learn the song and perform it live effectively to 15 million people on the Saturday night. So terrifying pressure. And he was resentful of it, though in his later years, when he was finding it harder to write, he recognised he recognised the value of having commissions, the pressure of knowing you've got to produce something. And he did, in the mid-80s, he was still writing one or two pieces, which are really rather fine for radio by that stage rather than for TV. So he would lock himself away in his study. He had a piano in there, and he would slog it out. But I think he could work at times. He could work fast. I think he would say that, and he was on record as being very dismissive of many of his songs, and say, well, he regarded them as ephemeral or throwaway, which is a hard judgment. I would give my right arm to have written many of the songs he's written. But yes, I think there was a lot of work that went in, and particularly the craft for a song like "The Hair of the Widow of Bridlington" or "The Jolly Captain" or "The Brigadier." As you say, there's such intelligence and craft and poetry and skill in the attention to detail.
There once was an old captain who wished nothing more than to live again his voyages and walk by the seashore. A simple man and a good man, but the bane of his life was his ill-tempered, bad-hearted bitch of a wife. Though the jolly captain was plagued by her bile, he smoked his long pipe and he smiled upon her tenderly. He didn't like her much, but he loved her despite her rough tongue. The way-faced old nutbag had been his pretty darling once.
The only writer I think that comes close to him as a songwriter for being as meticulous is Stephen Sondheim, the writer of American musicals, who likewise was, his rule was you stick rigidly to what you're going to do in terms of your meter. You don't break rules. You're consistent. And Jake's songs have that same skill.
She fell down her staircase, she fractured her neck. She lay upon the linoleum in a black apoplexy. Her baleful eyes bulged with unspeakable abuse. It seems that her spleen had been overproduced. So the jolly captain carried her to bed. Close your poor eyes, he said, sleep a little peaceably. He brought her fresh butter and cool watercress, violet and peppermint to soothe her heart's bitterness.
And the other thing that strikes me as a performer, I've heard people doing Jake's songs, and sometimes they change a line, change a word, sometimes it's misremembering it, but it's always to the detriment of the song, in my view. I've never heard anybody improve a Jake Thackray song, because I think Jake nailed down exactly what he wanted to say, and to use the assonance and the alliteration and the internal rhyme that makes it work, as well as the meaning of the words.
There's something about the paradoxical character of Jake Thackray. You can't help but see that there's a kind of a guy in tension here, because He's a Catholic school teacher on the one hand, and yet he's writing bawdy songs. And he's as you just said, he's a master wordsmith, and yet he writes off many of his songs as being absolutely bloody duff, to quote him. You
Yeah,
know, he's a genius with melody, but his songs he claims all sound the same. Or he was a brilliant performer on one hand, which had a great interest with the audience, but hated performing.
yes, it is full of paradoxes. I think that one part of it is that I think it's as though he can't take pride in or accept pride in anything that he does. Now that's not quite true. The song "The Bull," which gave us the title of the book, his wife Sheila said that was the song. I mean, that is his worldview. If you get to hear the song, and it's a fantastic assault on really respect for any sort of figure of authority. It's an anarchic, you know, attack on deference.
This is the idea really encapsulated in this picture of a bull, of the bigger the person, the bigger the authority, then the worse rubbish you get from them.
The more bull you're going to get from them, exactly. And so it's a brilliant song, and I think it absolutely encapsulates his worldview. But I think that I think he was brought up as a Roman Catholic. He had a very devout Catholic mother. She was a lady who went to mass every day. He was an altar boy till he was 19. He clearly respected his mother highly, and she was influential on him. And I think in many ways, Jake remained a practicing Catholic all his life. But I think his faith, the fact that he pursued or stayed in the Catholic faith rather than any other denomination of Christianity, to me speaks to his respect for his mother more than anything else. Because you couldn't, it is the most, given the dogmatic nature of the Catholic Church, to have somebody who effectively is so anti-authority, anti-hierarchy, so anarchic in their outlook. The two things are in collision. But I think that it was his respect for his mother that kept him there in many ways to the end. Interestingly, he was educated by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits would get the boys in his class, in every boy in the school, to write at the top of every piece of work AMDG, along with the title and the date, AMDG, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God. Now, what you were to do was not for personal glory, anything that you did. And this was, it became just an ingrained habit, and you can over-egg the idea that has influenced the way Jake's outlook on life was. But it's undeniable that I think right the way through his life, he is very self-critical and reluctant to see the quality of what he is writing.
It was only a gypsy, she sighed, a rugged, shaggy blackguard of a Didic, up to no good. I did what I could, a little physical persuasion, and he passed on by. It was only a gypsy boy, a rugged, shaggy blackguard of a Didic, up to no good. I did what I could. Physical persuasion, and he passed on by.
I mean, this is a man who, his greatest musical hero, the man who effectively is the reason why Jake became a songwriter, is Georges Brassens, the great French chansonnier. And Jake in 1973 had the opportunity and the two men became friends in the early 70s through a mutual friend. And he had the opportunity in Cardiff one night to be the support act for Georges Brassens. It was the only occasion Georges Brassens ever sang in the English-speaking world. And the whole thing happened because of their mutual friendship and the friend who had arranged the concert.
I mean, he was in total awe, I would say, of Georges Brassens.
He was, and he would say that he was the greatest living songwriter
Head and shoulders and knees and
Knees,
chest above every other songwriter in the world.
exactly. And Brassens said to Jake before the concert, well, why don't you come on when I do my encore? And there's a song called Le Roi, which is, I suppose, it translates as the King of Prats, the Roi des Cons, which Jake knew. It's a chord and response song. And so Brassens said, yeah, we could do this song together. It worked perfectly. And Jake turned him down. And I'm convinced that that is because he simply couldn't allow himself that moment of what he would regard as self-indulgence.
And that he didn't want to see himself on the same level as Brassens, it seems to me. Because he saw himself as always, the disciple with the master.
That's right. I think there's one of the interviews that I was trying to track down for the book and escaped me was an interview carried out by Colin Evans, who was the French lecturer at Cardiff University, who became friends with Jake, friends with Brassens, and set the concert up. But I wanted this interview because Colin, I think, would have been a very revealing interview, because I think Colin would have got closer as a friend than any journalist ever did to Jake. They talked about their time in his time in Algeria and so on. And all that survives of that interview is one quote in which Colin transcribed. And Jake said that basically Brassens is like this great big oak tree, and you can't bring him to Britain. It's just there, and the acorns drop. And you could just feel, and you try and do something with the acorn, but you could just feel his respect and his admiration for the man. So I think, yes, but I think that Jake's greatest songs, and particularly the later songs like The Bull, are every bit the equal of Brassens' writing. They match.
Yeah, and Brassens became, I would agree with you that I haven't listened much to Brassens because it doesn't mean a great deal to someone who can't speak French and they don't understand what he's actually singing about. You can appreciate the melodies, but if you don't speak French, then you miss out so much. But the point is, I think that he was every bit as good, if not better, in my view, than Brassens, but was in such awe of him that he as you say, refused to take part in an equal kind of relationship.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that the French laud and still do lauded Brassens as a brilliant songwriter, and wherever he went, he was revered, admired, almost worshipped in France. And it's as if the French have a particular way of understanding or getting this kind of song, which the English never seemed to be able to do, and which is why Jake Thackray never seemed to have this anywhere near the appeal that Brassens has.
No, I think that's right. I think it's partly because I think the French, sweeping statement, but I think the French take comedy seriously, whereas we don't. And there's more to Jake's songs than comedy. But I think
they're more comedic than Brassens are, I understand.
Yes, but I think that Brassens stands. This is the key to Jake's problem. Brassens stands within a French tradition, a Gallic tradition, that includes the Belgian Jacques Brel, Charles Trenet, Edith Piaf, the tradition of chanson, where it is the lyrics and the poetry of the words and the storytelling which are of prime importance. And so Brassens is part of a bigger cultural scene, if you like, in France. Now, Jake went to France for 3 years and fell in love with chanson and Brel, but particularly Brassens' music. But he comes back to Britain and he's set his heart on, in effect, doing what Brassens and Brel do, particularly Brassens, but there's nothing like it. I mean, he's flying solo. Brassens has peers. Leo Ferré, Jacques Brel, and Georges Brassens had a famous radio interview that was, I think it might have been filmed in 1968, and they are speaking as peers about the nature of songwriting and their view of the world and writing and so on. There's nothing like that for Jake, because Jake ends up as this sort of cultural hybrid. He's a Yorkshire chansonnier, and I think the other thing is, so there's that problem for Jake. And I think the other is that I think he really gets pigeonholed by the nature of the TV work that he gets, which ends up being very lucrative, but that idea of the guest spot where it's a 4-minute turn in the middle of, you know, a rather mediocre showbiz show like something like Braden's Week, and well, that's not giving him a space as an artist. That's just an oddity.
No, I know.
And
But that's how things were in the 70s. Almost every single show, Morecambe and Wise, you know, they all had a spot in the middle where you bring on a singer or a group for 4 minutes, and then you go back to what they were doing beforehand. Even comedy shows, sketch shows would do the same kind of thing. It was a standard format, but it's completely died out now.
It has, and the interesting thing is that Jake hated the format because you had to be, you know, you were put into this very artificial environment. You're in a TV studio. There are idiot boards for the audience. Everything about it's fake, if you like. And he was terrified of the live work, but he'd also despised the way that things were manufactured as entertainment. So he turned his back on that sort of television, but then. In '73, there's a television show program called The Camera and the Song, a series where the BBC gave basically each program they gave to a leading cameraman and a songwriter and said, go away and do something on a particular theme. And Jake's program there, he doesn't feature in it. It's all footage of the Yorkshire Dales, but he writes a series of songs for it, like The Brigadier, The Poor Sod, old Molly Metcalf's in it. And
The Rain is on the Mountainside.
The Rain, fantastic songs.
That's one of my favourites, I would think.
The rain is on the mountainside, the beast is in the silent meadow, the north countryside is patiently waiting again. Blackbird is dumb in the juniper, lapwing shivers in the dripping thicket. Down in the stone-faced town, one door opens. For though the weather blow wild, I see the shepherd step up to his moor side. And in despite of the cold, the poor farmer going to his meadow below, going to his meadow below.
A beautiful song, and you just see him in a completely different way. And I think if he had done more of that sort of work, I remember reading a review, a Times reviewer saying, well, I never really liked Jake Thackray very much or noticed him very much, but I suddenly, you know, seeing this, I can really see there's something different here. And in a sense, in the mid to late 70s, that was a potential direction of travel, but it was a one-off series.
When the birch tree is agonized, and when the little river is tormented, the land on its knees, the house on its hunkers, there is a figure moving by the wall, leaning for breath upon the stony shoulder, his eyes to the skies, seldom lifted. For though the weather blow wild, I see the shepherd step onto his moor side. And in despite of the cold, the poor farmer going to his meadow below, going to his meadow below.
One other songwriter who, unlike Brassens, who he never felt the equal to, there's some interesting kind of song with Loudermilk, who I'd never heard of before. He's an American kind of singer-songwriter, and they kind of play alternative songs to each other to entertain each other. But there you can see much more feelings of equality between the two. In fact, Loudermilk, I think, defers to Thackeray as a much more accomplished artist, performer, and writer.
Yes, and it's a fascinating. There are two programs, and it was on a DVD that we produced a couple of years ago, which Jake.
Yes, you produced this particular DVD, which contains pretty well most of his TV appearances, which are available, plus also Thackeray and Loudermilk, which is well worth having.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about the Thackeray and Loudermilk programs is they deliberately, the director decided, knowing I think what Jake was like in particular. decided to cover up the red light on the cameras so that the two men weren't aware of when they were being filmed. Now, obviously, there were cameras there, but deliberately they were trying to get something that was more intimate. And you get that in that Jake lays into American music in the programme.
Yeah, yes, he said it took over the British music.
And again, you can see that diffidence and sort of dismissiveness.
I thought Loudermilk was a bit stunned at the end and just went straight into his last one, Abilene, I think it was.
Yes, so Jake's, you could say it's quite rude in some, but you get a sense of Jake's attitude to what's happened to the British tradition of music and the impact of American music on it, and also Jake's discomfort with being praised. You can hear his sort of, he's looking at his toes really and his feet when Loudermilk is saying, "Gosh," is in awe of his writing.
Yeah, yeah. Can we come towards the end of Jake Thackray's life? It's a bit which I've been reluctant to read about in your biography, as I mentioned. But his life didn't have a happy ending. He died on Christmas Eve in 2002 at the age of 64. But before that time, it was rather sad.
Yes, I think that Jake had a number of problems. I think one issue was that he fundamentally was not comfortable in his skin and I think ultimately ended up bored by the path that he had taken, that his talent had taken him down as a performer. He suffered terribly from stage fright. He hated performing in big venues because of the lack of connection with the audience. He was most comfortable in a folk club, but you make far less money in a folk club. So he ended up on I would say, a performance treadmill. I mean, he did thousands of concerts up and down the country, long journeys, lonely. And I think that ground him down. And it also left him with less space for the writing, which was the thing that he most loved.
And less space for his family too.
Yes, he was a very loving father. He had 3 sons. When he had time with them during school holidays, he would do everything when they were young boys that you would want as a father. Quite unlike his own experience with his own father, who was a bully of a man and very cold, and had no real connection or relationship with his sons. So there was that issue. Alcohol, sadly, was also...
He was separated from his wife towards the end as well. You kind of skate over that little bit about the problems that he had in that area. I don't know whether that was deliberate.
I think it was... Yeah, undoubtedly there were problems. It wasn't possible to interview his widow, Sheila. Sadly, she passed away before work on the books. Began. Okay. So that was one factor in it. Undoubtedly, there were strains on the marriage, both because of the issue of alcohol, and also because Jake, his management of he was a man who needed a manager, but was not a man who temperamentally would tolerate anybody managing him. He was an anarchist, so he wouldn't keep receipts. He would take cash rather. So he ended in a situation of financial disarray, and that would have brought pressure onto the marriage as well. So I think that there was a set number of things going on, and he stopped turning up for gigs. So if he didn't want to do something, he didn't go. I mean, that's partly maybe an element of poor organisation, but then
there's also an element of irresponsibility there when you've got hundreds of people waiting for you.
Oh, of course there is. And then, of course, having not turned up, and his agent, when he had an agent, and his first agent was a big London agent, would have to field the phone calls from angry promoters saying, "Where was Jake last night?" And then the phone would glow red, and then he would phone Jake, and he would say Jake would lie to him. And he would tell these extraordinary, fantastical lies, to the point where he said, you could tell from the tone of voice that Jake knew that you knew that he was lying. So he would weave a fantasy, but then he would arrange and he would do the gig several weeks later. A date would be arranged and he wouldn't charge for it. So yes, he let people down. And initially, promoters, because he was so good as a performer, people were willing to forgive. But obviously, over time, it became a tough sell. It became hard to get gigs if you can't be sure he's going to turn up. So there was yeah, I think he was deeply conflicted and probably felt very guilty about the position that he put himself in. So all of that snowballed, and then by the 1990s, really he withdrawn from television by the late 80s and radio. He moved to a space where he was more comfortable, but that meant he had no money. He was declared bankrupt by the end of the 90s. He'd been working as a columnist for the Yorkshire Post and the Catholic Herald for 5 years, wonderful columns, and I think probably an outlet for his creativity when his songwriting sort of dried up. But yeah, so it's got a sad arc to it, but I think one of Jake's friends said to us that he felt the only thing that Jake regretted in his life, really regretted, was the breakup of his marriage, that he wasn't bothered about money, those sorts of things. He would say, and I've read the last thing he did for the Yorkshire Post was a Q&A after he'd finished, after they dropped him as a columnist because he'd become unreliable. He wouldn't deliver copy on time every week. And it was a Q&A, and one in it, there's 20 questions. Do you have any regrets? And it was, my regrets are being such a duff performer, such a duff writer, such a duff husband, for having let so many people down. So there is a real sadness to it all.
The strange mixture here, though, of genius on the one hand. He was a brilliant writer, brilliant lyricist, brilliant melodicist, and yet fused together with some serious character flaws here.
Yeah. Yes, I think there was that, and there was one of the things that I realised very early on when doing the research is he was also a risk taker. He was a risk taker. I mean, this was as a boy. He spent 4 years at a Catholic boarding seminary in North Wales, and he ended up going hitchhiking to France at the age of 12 with an older lad. By the time he was 17, and hitchhiking without a tent, without any money, sleeping in ditches and so on. When he was 17, he went hitchhiking, and hitchhiking was a common practice in the 50s and 60s. But when he was 17, he and a friend hitchhiked to Rome because they were inspired by Hilaire Belloc, and they did the same thing. They were pretty, I'd say he was pretty casual about his own safety and well-being. He went to Algeria during the Algerian War of Independence for 6 months. It would be akin to going to Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He was curious about the world. His son said to us, his son Sam said to us, well, the thing is that if there was chaos going on and a disaster, and very often it would be a disaster caused by Jake, the person that you wanted to be most with was Jake, because he was so used to things going wrong that he had his own way of just getting through it. So yes,
he wrote a song called Leopold Alcox, which is all about someone whose every move becomes a disaster. Is that really autobiographical, do you think?
Absolutely. I think he's taken, as so often in his songs, there is self-knowledge in there. Leopold Alcox, he would say at gigs, was a pseudonym for a friend of his called Reginald Sedgwick, who was a wonderful, charismatic, chaotic teacher.
But he never existed, did he?
He never existed. The wonderful, chaotic, charismatic, invented teacher was Jake.
I talked about this man too much. His name is Reginald Walter William Sedgwick. And, well, what's your name? Now, the thing about Reggie, the reason why I wanted to write a song about him, why I was compelled to do it, was because there's something basically wrong with Reggie. Or else, either God gave Reggie something special, or else he missed a very important bit out. Because the thing is that things keep happening to Reggie, and they're quite drastic things. He's not one of these people who are accident-prone. You know, we all know people who are accident-prone. People who bump into stuff and drop stuff and go to the wrong place at the wrong time. Reggie's not like that. Reggie is more doom-ridden. It's just as if as if God is after him. It's as if God made Reggie and set him down in Hartlepool, wound him up and let him go, and then regretted it. And as if he's been after him ever since, you know, looking down through the chinks in the clouds. And when he spots Reggie, he chucks a brick at him. And of course, with it being God, he doesn't miss often.
So I think there's no doubt. And Jake's brother-in-law said, well, when he went up to Abbey, he would go up to London as a teenager. He was a good deal younger than Jake, in the late 60s. And Jake would say, oh, do you want to come along to Abbey Road? Or do you want to come along to the BBC? Oh, why don't you come along? He'd want to share experiences with people, not to show off, but just because he knew that they would bring pleasure to people.
Of course, he met the Beatles there at Abbey Road. John Lennon seemed to like his songs as well.
They were influenced by him. They were admired. Happiness is a Warm Gun. Paul McCartney says that is John Lennon having his go at channeling a Jake Thackray idea for a song. Yeah. But Rick, Jake's brother-in-law, said, well, you'd want to go with him because you always knew something would happen. You know, something peculiar, something odd. You know, Jake walked into a plate glass door in Paris. The list of accidents he had is massive. I lost count of how many broken legs and broken limbs he had during the course of his life.
Well, there's a strange BBC documentary where he goes down Swaledale and he comes on screen with his whole leg in plaster, and which is
exactly. And he continues on, and it was murder for the film crew because they had to get him up onto a cottage on a hillside on a handcart. But yes, it's
I saw it. So your picture of him though at the end. Was he at the end of his life a bitter man? Was he a relieved man? Was he finally at rest with his own limitations?
Certainly no suggestion whatsoever that he was bitter. He was hostile to show business. There were things that he was angry about, that he was distrustful and cynical about music publishers, and hated the BBC. I mean, he was offered the chance by the BBC after Brassens died to write and present his own 40-minute programme about him on Radio 4. Yeah. And he turned it down because he didn't trust what they would do with it. Yeah. So there were these things. But at the end of his life, no, he seems to have been, I suppose, to have equilibrium, to be content with where he was. He didn't like attention. He was playing... He would still get his guitar out until he broke both his arms in 2000. He fell down an embankment, broke both arms, and could never play the guitar properly again.
That's a shame.
Which is a great shame. But until that point, he would have been getting the guitar out at church barbecues when somebody would say, "Oh, Jake, can you play us some songs?" Or at the pub when he was sure that there weren't tourists about. So
there's I just wondered if there was a kind of a bitterness there, because there were one or two songs which suggest that kind of as if he'd been dealt badly in the world. There's one which sticks in my mind. I stayed off work today, which is, it goes to the whole part of people, from the butcher all the way through to the rascally Episcopal to the angel at the end, where he gets dealt a bad set of cards and gets conned at every single turn. Is that his outlook on life?
I think that's certainly that. I wouldn't call it bitterness, though. I think that there is a cynicism about the way that particularly people with power and in positions of authority may abuse their power. And if you read the Yorkshire Post pieces, his views about the likes of Murdoch and Maxwell and co. and the behaviour of governments and so on is very clear. So he was distrustful of the establishment. So there were clearly things which made him angry. And in many of his songs, there is this idea of being duped, of being tricked. But I don't think he was cynical about people in general. And what comes across, I think one of the things that's wonderful about his songs is there's a real love and compassion for people and for ordinary people. I don't think it's sentimental.
One of his songs, I think, ties in with the end of his life, of course, one of his most famous ones, The Last Will and Testament of Jake Thackray. I just wondered how much of that it would be genuinely his real emotions about after he's gone and how he wants people to think. I mean, just for those who've never heard it, it's about, I don't want you weeping about me. I don't want you, longing for that or looking wistfully back. Rather have a good time.
When I snuff it, bury me quickly. Then let carousals begin, but not to do with a few ham sandwiches, a sausage roll or two, and a small port wine. Please roll the carpet right back, get cracking with your old gay Gordons and your knees up, shake it up, live it up, sup it up, hell of a kind of a time. And if the coppers come around, we'll tell them the party's mine, boys.
Have a real knees up, and if the coppers come around,
is that how he really was, or is that just a fake?
No, I think that's him. I think that really is the way his view of his own. I don't think he had any interest in being celebrated after he died. I mean, interestingly, how
would he make of your biography then?
Well, that's a really good question, and I've talked to various people who are friends and family about it, and what they all say is, well, of course, part of Jake would have said, oh, no, can't have a book about me? No, I'm not worth it. But another part of him, they think actually secretly, they wouldn't admit it, would be proud of it.
Let best be eaten, fill every empty glass. Let no breast be beaten, let no tooth be gnashed. Don't bother with a fancy tombstone or a big deal angel or a little copper flower pot plant. A dog nose in my eyes or a pussy willow, but don't forget me not. No epitaphs, no keepsakes you can let me memory slip. You can say a prayer or two for me soul then, but make it quick, boys.
I think that it was important for us that we wanted to try to capture the nature of his life and his personality, and to be true to who he was. Because I think if we were trying to whitewash him,
I think he's done that remarkably well. It's a very good book, and one which I would thoroughly recommend. But we've come to the end of our time, Paul. But let me just ask one question more, if I may, and that is for people who've never listened or heard about Jake Thackray or heard any of his songs, what would you recommend that they start with? He's left us a legacy of about, 90 odd songs, I can see. Where would you begin if you were going to introduce somebody?
If I was to introduce someone, I would say, and some of these songs are on YouTube. I would seek out The Bull.
There's a couple of. There's this one which you
well,
that's the Lost Archives, and there's a live performance as well, which I've got my hands on somewhere.
So there's some. I mean, I've been involved with a group of fans called the Jake Thackray Project, and we've got a website, jakethackray.com, and on there you can find CDs and DVDs of fantastic material.
And also, very, very kindly, some the lyrics of all of the songs and the chords which you've worked out for yourself.
Yes, because we want to. I mean, I think these are songs which should be shared and celebrated as part of our.
I'm trying to play some myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So we want people to perform them, and we have a Jake Fest coming up in London in August as well. But I'd say go and seek out songs like the Remembrance, the greatest anti-war song ever written, in my view. The Bull, the Hair of the Wood of Bridlington. I would say to anybody who's not heard Jake's songs, you'll hear songs which will floor you, in my view, when you realise what's in there, both in terms of his ability to be moving, his ability to be.
You missed out one of the most comic songs ever written, which was, of course, Sister Josephine.
Yes.
About the nun who was really a criminal in disguise.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I suppose he would say that's one of his greatest hits. And Jake being Jake, when he was performing it live, he would always say, well, I'll do this so that we can all get it out of the way and that we can then forget it.
Most popular song, maybe.
Yes.
I rediscovered him through La Di Da. because I found that an amazing hooked melody. And again, it sums up his character, it seemed to me, that he didn't have any time for any la-di-da.
Exactly.
That was kind of runs all the way through.
No,
but I
I
also
think that,
like songs like The Black Swan. I think I went on to that next. I don't know what that was about, The Black Swan. It sounds like it's about loss, about losing someone, but it wasn't his own loss, was it?
Well, I don't, not as far as I'm aware. Although it becomes tragically, 20 years on, it becomes it's the way that his life goes, really.
But, Paul, thank you very much indeed for
Thank you.
talking to me about Jake Thackray. I can recommend the book, Beware of the Bull, and the jakethackray.com website is certainly one worth going and perusing there if you're interested in it. But thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Lady, if your bosom is heaving, don't waste your bosom on me. Let it heave for a man who's breathing, a man who can feel, a man who can see. And to me cronies you can read me books, you can drive around in me motor car, and you can fish your trout with my flying tackle. You can play on my guitar and sing me songs, wear me shirts. You can even settle me debts. You can kiss my little missus if she's willing then, but no regrets, boys. Your rosebuds are numbered, gather them now for rosebud's sake. And if your hands aren't too encumbered, gather a bud or two for